Thanks for tuning in. You're watching Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host, Kyle Brotherson, and I have two special guests today as we review this KTM 50 SX. Stick around. Well, thanks for joining us. I've got both of my sons in here to help talk about this bike. So this is a 2017 KTM 50 SX bike, and I brought in the two experts in here because these are the guys who have actually ridden this bike. This is the second KTM 50 we've had. Konnor? So I've got Konnor here. Konnor, tell us your name and how old are you?
I'm Konnor Brotherson and I'm 11.
All right. And what's your name and how old are you?
I'm Case Brotherson and I'm 8.
Perfect. So this is not our first KTM 50 SX. We had another one that was like a 2013. 2013?
I think.
And that was the one that Konnor mostly rode. So Konnor he's put a little bit of time in this one, maybe probably 4 hours. The rest of the hours have gone to Case. And Konnor, how many hours did we say we had on this?
34.
Okay, so we got 34 hours on it. So Case has put on probably around 32 of those hours, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So the thing about these 50s is we moved up from a Honda 50. And both of the boys started out on the Honda CRF 50F, and those bikes are really good bikes. They're very bulletproof, but I had some problems with them with the fact that the suspension was kind of limiting their speed, and the brakes were limiting their speed. The suspension, they could go faster than the suspension could react, and so it was kind of a problem, and I saw them kind of suffering for it. So then immediately we moved Konnor, we moved you to a KTM 50 SX, and it was the 2013 version of that. Can you kind of tell me what the difference was and what the change was when you moved from the Honda 50 to this one? What did you notice the most?
That this bike was a lot more powerful.
Was it faster too?
Yes.
Like how much faster? Like what did you notice about it? Was it harder to ride than the Honda?
No.
No, it wasn't, because it looked like it was harder to ride, because I saw multiple times on hills that you could make up a hill on your Honda 50 because it would just kind of let you lug up the hill. Remember how this one doesn't lug up the hill? Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. On this one, you have to hold the throttle farther to make it up hills. But on the Honda 50, you don't have to do that.
So the Honda 50 has a lot more low-end torque, and the Honda 50 is just like you just have 3 gears. This doesn't have any gears at all. So you guys aren't shifting on this. So what does that mean, that you have to kind of be in the power a lot on this bike? Talk about that, Konnor.
Yeah, you have to be in the power a lot more on this bike.
So Case, did you notice that there were some hills on this bike that were almost impossible for you to climb in the beginning?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Talk a little bit about that. Like, how did you get over that? Because I know this bike doesn't have as much power. So how did you compensate for that? How did you get over those hills or up those obstacles, since this bike doesn't have a lot of power?
I was just practicing doing stuff.
Did you have to use more speed?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we notice with these bikes is KTM has made it so that you can adjust the RPM engagement point of their clutches. So you take the 4 bolts out on this clutch cover. It's best if you lay it over on its side, and then you don't lose all your fluid. And it helps if you take your brake lever off as well. But you can adjust these clutches to make them, to suit your needs, so that it'll engage at a higher RPM or at a lower RPM. Each one, they kind of changed this from one bike model that we had to the next, so I'm not going to go into the details of how you change it, but you can adjust this even out if you need to, out on the camping trip or at the track. You can take this cover off and adjust the engagement point of your clutch, which is nice. But they don't have a ton of power. And so I thought we were going to move up to this bike and we were instantly going to be so much better. And on the flatland we were. Disclaimer, we don't race these bikes. We've been trail riding these bikes. The kids have ridden at motocross tracks, right? You've done motocross tracks, right?
Yeah.
And you did a motocross track on it?
Not that, but
you did
65.
it on the 65. Yeah, he did it on the 65. So we're mostly out doing trail rides, and this bike made it a little bit more difficult in some of the trickier, nastier, rocky terrain, because you have to carry more speed into this. And these bikes are a little bit more like an on-off switch with the power. Do you find, Case, that this bike it kind of has no power, no power, no power, and then all the power comes on super fast. Do you find it like that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So, and Case, you've just recently moved up to a KTM 65, right?
Yeah.
Right. And Konnor, you're on a YZ 65 right now?
Yep.
Yeah. So with these little bikes, it was kind of like a love-hate relationship for me as the dad, because there were certain times where I was like, yeah, I'm really glad that we have this. I'm really glad that we moved up from the Honda, because the Honda has a lot lower seat height. This one is taller, and it's more difficult to ride in the tricky stuff. So when we would be out in the wide open terrain, the boys were super fast on these bikes. But then when we would get into the hill climbs and the rockier, kind of more rutted terrain, they suffered on this bike. Because it is literally like an on-off switch. You hold the power down and it goes, and then finally, and it takes off. But it takes a while for it to take off. It takes some time for it to build up that power. And I noticed, especially at the first, when Konnor was riding one just like this, there were some times that you really struggled in the rocky stuff. Remember those times where it was just really frustrating, and because on the Honda you could go so slow, and on this bike you couldn't go slow? Do you remember it being kind of frustrating?
Yes.
Can you talk any more about that?
I don't really remember.
He doesn't remember. Can you talk about how frustrating it was? I know that I would watch you, and sometimes you'd be really frustrated because you had to go super fast through a section, but you didn't want to go fast. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was hard because there was probably like a hard part, and then you had to go through like another hard part when you had to go fast through all those parts, and it was just really hard.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is you have to go fast on a bike like this. It is a race bike, and it's made to go around a motocross track and do jumps. And so when we're out there trail riding it, you have to go fast, and sometimes it just doesn't have enough power to go slow enough to make it through the obstacles for those kids. So let's talk about working on the bike. These bikes are kind of finicky. So we bought this bike brand new. It was a 2017. And I bought it new because I thought I didn't want to inherit someone else's problems. And for the most part, it was okay. But there are times, and I leaned this bike out because it was too rich when we got it because we're riding at altitude. But there were times when this thing just wouldn't start. And I would tear the carburetor apart and clean it out, and then it would start again. And then other times we would be in the middle, like we went to a motocross track, and we're in the middle of one of our motos, and the bike, it quits, and it will not start again. I have to kick it. And finally, I'd choke it, and I could only get it to run with the choke on. And then all of a sudden, something would happen, and I don't know if we just had like something in our idle circuit, in the idle jet, because it happened at the motocross track a couple times. It happened out on the trail a couple times. And I just felt like it was a little bit more finicky than some of the other bikes. One of the things I hate on these bikes is how they have the little fuel petcock. It's like a screw that you turn up or a screw that you turn out. And I have found that there are times where it can vibrate that petcock up and shut the fuel off. I know it sounds like counterintuitive and it sounds impossible, but I've seen it do it multiple times on this bike. And then we had to actually replace the petcock on this bike because it got stripped out. Remember that one time that we were out on the trail and it just started to leak fuel everywhere?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just, the petcock just came apart because it's a cheap part. It's cheaply made. I don't know why they can't just do a better fuel petcock like the YZ65 or the YZs, because even the KTM 65 version of this bike, it still has a really crappy fuel petcock in my opinion. Okay, so something to note on these little KTM 50 SXs, the Kickstarter comes out and a kid actually kicks it down forward. So they're kicking it forward rather than on a traditional bike, the Kickstarter would be here and you kick it down this way. I'll start with you, Konnor, because this is the first bike that you were kickstarting, and now you've moved over to a bike where you kick it backwards. Which do you like better?
Kicking it backwards.
Why?
Because for some reason it's just harder kicking it forward.
Okay, Case, and you just moved over to a KTM 65 where you're kicking it backwards the normal way. This one is a forward kick. Which do you like better?
I mean, the one where you kick forward, it was pretty nice, but then when I got on the 65, it was really nice, so I probably like the 65 Kickstarter better. Okay,
so there you've heard it from both my boys. And maybe they just have them this way for the little kids, but by the time he was riding this, he was 7-ish. And Konnor was 7, 8, and 9 on a 65 like this. They did not really love the forward kickstart on it. Tell you one thing, a couple things that are really good though, the brakes. The brakes on these little bikes are very good. They're formula brakes on the front and on the rear, and I think they have pretty good feel. And I know they have better stopping power than what we had on the Honda. So the brakes are good. I feel like the suspension can definitely absorb more of the chop, and you can kind of tune it in for some different things. You can adjust the ride height back here on the shock. So that's a nice thing. So the ride height can be just adjusted just a little bit. It's a PDS style suspension because the suspension hooks here up on the top of the swing arm. Something else that I thought was kind of frustrating with these bikes, you cannot get a kickstart or a kickstand for them. I know that they're mostly race bikes and that's what they're mainly for, but I would have loved to have a kickstand. How many times have we needed a kickstand and we didn't have it?
A lot on rides and washing the bikes. Just a lot.
Yeah, like it's kind of annoying washing the bikes and stuff when you have to put your triangle in. Would you agree with that, Konnor?
Yes.
So if you were redesigning this, or even with the aftermarket people, would you say that it would be nice to get a kickstand available for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, because some of us out there are not racing these things, and it would be nice to have a kickstart, even from a third party. So, a kickstand. From a third party. So the brakes were good. Foot brake was good. Front brake was good. This bike has no clutch, so you're just going through. The kids just twist on the gas and go. And these things are pretty fast. I would say it'll go 30, 35 miles an hour, even with me on it. And sometimes when the kids are on it, they can probably rip this thing 40 miles an hour, maybe even slightly faster, just depending, maybe even 45. So they are quite fast, but they don't have a lot of low-end torque. But the carburetor is just kind of finicky. Again, this one has about 34, 35 hours on it, and I was going to take this one all the way up to at least 50 hours. The way that we're riding, we're not pushing them super hard all the time. And so if you're racing these things, I know a lot of racing dads will place these things at like 5, 6, 7 hours as far as the top ends. I would go at least 50 on this one before we did anything with it because we're not pushing it super hard. As far as tires, they come with Maxxis tires. The tires are okay. I end up switching them out after a while for something, and I still go with Maxxis. I just think that the tires that they put on here are not the greatest tires in the world, but they're serviceable. They're totally fine for the kids to go out there and start ripping. They're not spark arrested, so you got to be careful with that. As far as fuel goes, if you're going to go on a very long trail ride, I suggest that Dad rides a 2-stroke that carries this same type of gas because these fuel tanks are not very big. And there were multiple times where we were out on trail rides where we were getting low on fuel. And so it was nice that I could have a bottle with me and take some of the gas out of my bike and put it in this bike so that we could make it back from some of those trail rides. Because it is not a real big tank. This is made for motocross racing, and it works fine there. You get way back out in the woods, and you might want to have a little bit of extra gas on that, which is, I would just steal it from my bike if we needed it. When you're out on the trails, these bikes can and do overheat because these radiators are made to cool the bike down when it's going fast. And if you're on some of the more technical trails and stuff, the bike can get hot, and then also I was worried about overheating the clutch, and that was probably my biggest fear, is that we were going to overheat in the clutch and burn up the clutch in some of the rockier, nastier terrain. And so I did not love taking the boys out. If I knew we were going to go for a long time, or if I knew it was going to be kind of technical, sometimes I had to adjust the trail just because I was worried about burning these things up and getting the motor too hot, not enough air coming through the radiators, and just getting everything too hot. So I am glad to be moving off of these and up to the 65s. What else, boys? This uses an ATF transmission fluid. It's an automatic transmission fluid in this guy, and that's what you lube this thing with. Airbox is under the seat, so it's pretty easy to get, although sometimes it's hard to get the seat to hook back down when you're changing your air filter. This has an air fork. We never really played too much with different settings on the air forks because we're just out trail riding. What other things should we talk about? It's got a decent chain on it. We haven't had to do anything with the chain. Like I said, I hate the petcock. No clutch. We haven't had any problem with fork seals. This little flap here, the little mud flap here, that has been annoying because when you run the bike backwards, it catches on this and it pops out. I don't know if you can see that. It kind of pops down, and that happens when you're out on the trail too. So you'll be going along and you'll need to roll the bike back or something, and it'll catch the mud flap there a lot of times, especially if there's weight of the rider on it. Anyway, it'd be nice if you could get skid plates for these things too, but we couldn't find a skid plate for it, so we've kind of beat up the bottom of the frame just a little bit, but the kids haven't done too bad with it. The other thing is they're pretty beefy as far as crashing them. We haven't broken anything. This one, we haven't even broken a lever on this bike, so it's been pretty good that way. It's just sometimes it's finicky to get it to run and keep running, and sometimes it doesn't want to start that easy. We have noticed that, well, actually, I'll just ask Konnor. Konnor, when we switched you to the KTM 65, the next bike up, was the 65 easier to start? And can you talk about that?
Yeah, it was it was a lot easier to start because kicking it backwards is just I was more used to it.
And I just feel like this bike starts slower. This is a slower starting bike than our 65. Now that you've moved to the 65, which is easier to start? Is this bike easier to start or the 65?
When I was on the 50, I saw Konnor. He just kicked it once and it would start, and I had to kick it like 5 times. And when I got on the 65, I only had to kick it once too. So I like the 65 better.
So you heard it from both boys. This bike is harder to start. You have to kick it more times than the 65 bikes, both the 65 bikes that we have out in the shop. So that's pretty much it. I have a love-hate relationship with this bike. And by the time we were done with it, or just about done riding it, I was so glad to be moving off of this bike and moving up to the 65s. This bike serves its purpose and it's filling a void for some people. But I did not love owning this. I really, really love the 65s, but this one, I'm glad that we're moving off of it. It is not my favorite bike from KTM. They're a little bit finicky, temperamental, a lot more temperamental than any of the other big bikes that we've had. And then the big brother of this, the 65, I absolutely love, and we'll be doing a full video review on that one. And the YZ65, which Konnor is riding. But this bike, I'm glad that we're moving past it. And that would be my full review. Hey, if you like these videos, please remember to like them, subscribe to the channel. Please support us on Patreon. Please support us by using the links down in the description. Those links actually feed these mouths right here. So, Konnor, do you like eating?
Yeah.
Case, do you like to eat food?
Yes.
Okay, so they like to eat food, and Dirt Bike Channel is our only source of income. So if you use those links down in the description, we get kickbacks on those. If you support us on Patreon, if you support the Dirt Bike Channel the Dirt Bike sweepstakes that we do, that helps support my family. And that's pretty much it. Until next time, thanks for watching. And if you want to see more videos of these two awesome boys, give us a thumbs up and let us know down in the comments, right?
Yep.
Any parting words, Konnor?
No.
He's a man of few words. Okay, we'll catch you later.